All right, on to passage 4 of test 4 of the ACT English section. Let's get to it. It's called In Remembrance of a Student Hero, and it's about this guy, Mario Savio, who led a student protest at Berkeley. So it says, given that all the choices are true, which one most effectively introduces this sentence by describing what the free speech movement was? All right, well, here's free speech movement. During the height of the U.S. presidential election campaign. Well, this is not really relevant, but aside from that, it doesn't describe free speech movement. It's grammatically correct, and all of these are grammatically correct, but it doesn't do this, describing what the free speech movement was, okay? What about a coalition of civil rights groups and other political organizations? Sure, that's a perfect description. What about H? At the center of a conflict with university officials. Does that describe what the free speech movement was? No. What about prompted by university action taken that fall? Does not describe what the free speech movement was. So the only answer choice that makes sense is G. 47. All right, it says he had volunteered to do civil rights work in Mississippi, the 20th state admitted to the Union. The Union is it's like what they used to call the United States. Is this relevant? The 20th state admitted. Is it like really? You need to know that for this passage? No, it's like a random piece of information. It's like, oh, the state has a border of 2,700 miles. I have no idea, but it's just a random piece of extra information that's really not relevant. And you see that same problem. Admitted to the Union in 1817, that's almost the same thing. And what about also known as Magnolia State? Oh, what the nickname for the state, again, is not relevant. All of these things are details about Mississippi. They're just kind of, this isn't a geography passage, right? It's not a geography lesson. So the best one that just cuts out all the extraneous information is Mississippi D. All right, 48, it says, during the Freedom Summer of 1964, before returning to classes that fall. Well, there's nothing wrong with that because you have this preposition here, and then whatever follows that. I mean, that's just big one prepositional phrase. Before returning, and then you have two classes, another preposition, a phrase. You don't separate prepositional phrases from what comes, from what they're describing. With commas, so no punctuation needed. You would normally need something if it said before returning to classes that fall, comma, and then you had the noun. But here, these prepositions are coming after the noun, so there's no problem. Okay. Again, prepositions that come after, or certainly if you have just this big. During the prepositional phrase of 1964, before, two, you have four prepositional phrases in a row. You don't separate prepositional phrases from each other, boom, 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 with commas. Just leave it, okay? And again, if you had this big prepositional, giant multi prepositional phrases before the noun was modifying, you wouldn't need a comma, but in this case, it's all coming after, so there's no comma needed, especially in between random prepositions. No need. So all of them do that except, or all of them don't do that except F, so F is the correct answer, no change. What about 49? That stuff led to a student strike. Oh, okay. That stuff, this ish, blah, blah, like, this is just like super informal, not super, but I'm just saying it to emphasize, but compared to the way this is very descriptive and it's a factual type of passage, this word choice is definitely out of place. Also, you don't really know what stuff is referring to. It's not really clear. And so that stuff led to a student strike. Well, what led up to a student strike? Like setting up the information, they're reacting fiercely. The university ban, it's sort of unclear. If you think about it, you could probably figure out it's probably the ban, but grammatically it's unclear. And then also just the tone, the way it's like, whoa, dude, what's up? Like that's not, this doesn't fit, okay? So A wouldn't work. That ban works because you know what it's talking about. What about which? Which wouldn't work because, first of all, you can't start a sentence with which. That's incorrect. The other problem is if you have which, this is a relative pronoun. It makes this whole thing basically just a relative clause, meaning it doesn't have a subject and doesn't have a verb. It basically makes this whole thing just a big adjective. So that would be an incomplete sentence. And then it, well, the problem with it is you don't know what it is talking about. That ban is clearly referring to something, and it's referring to what makes sense for it to be referred to. Okay. The other thing is, just as a general thing to keep in mind, I mean, if you're ever unsure, well, is it clearly referring to ban or is it not? Well, here, is ban a noun? No, it's just a verb here, right? So because it's not even a noun, if this just had it, what noun is it referring to? It couldn't be referring to this, so logically that couldn't even make sense. Does that make sense? I'm saying makes sense a lot, but you get the point, right? All right, on to question 50. All right, 50 says, that stuff or that ban led to a student strike and a sit-in protest at the main administration building. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with this sentence because you have the subject, it should be that ban, verb, to a student strike and a sit-in protest. It led to that, and it led to that. You have a compound object here. There's no need to separate things with unnecessary punctuation. So you have the proper conjunction here. It says, so F would be correct. It's if you had it became, this would be a run-on. It would say that stuff led to a student strike. It became a sit-in protest. You have a subject verb, and then you would have a new subject and new verb not properly separated by the proper punctuation or the proper punctuation and conjunction. Like you would need like a semicolon or a period in a new sentence or a comma and the word and, something like that. Otherwise, it's a run-on sentence. H and was, that stuff led to a student protest and was. Well, you don't need a comma, so if you put and was, but if you say and was, that would basically mean that ban led to the student strike, and then you would have and was. You would have that ban was also a student sit-in protest. Does it make sense to say the ban was a sit-in protest? No, it doesn't make sense. I mean, could you say, well, if you say and was, the student strike was a sit-in protest? Well, no, that wouldn't work grammatically because if you have and was, the subject that this verb is still going with is still grammatically that ban, okay? If you wanted this sit-in protest to be like an explanation for what the strike was, you'd have to say, comma, which was a sit-in protest, or comma, a sit-in protest, or something like that. But in this case, grammatically, a sit-in protest is defining that ban, which doesn't make sense, or that stuff. And then you have the word than. Well, than just doesn't really make sense. Than is used for it's a word that's used for comparison purposes, like more than, less than. And if you just say that stuff led to a student strike than a sit-in protest, well, this just doesn't make any kind of sense at all. So that is wrong. So F, no change, is the correct answer, meaning you just leave it. It's perfectly fine. All right, on to question 51. It says, the writer has decided to divide this opening paragraph into two. The best place to add the new paragraph break would be at the beginning of sentence. Okay, so what this question is basically saying is, let's split up this giant paragraph, this one that goes until here, into two different paragraphs. So each paragraph has to have its own idea focus. So where would that make sense to have? Well, if we read up until right here, actually, all of this is focused. It talks about Mario Savio, but it's specifically in relation to the free speech movement and exactly what happened at this time. It's talking about, what this free speech movement did and, blah, 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 blah. If you would go to sentence 4, there's actually a switch. It says the son of working class parents, and now the focus is specifically not on his relation to the free speech movement, like here, and the national spotlight, it's talking about Mario Savio as a person and how he grew up, and I guess how he came to work in this area or came to feel really passionate about this area. So that actually, it would make sense to have the break here. If you have a break anywhere else, it wouldn't make sense, because this is the clearest separation between Mario Savio, the person, and his relationship specifically to the 1960s Berkeley movement and him being in the national spotlight and all of that stuff. All right. Well, 4, beginning of 4, because it would signal the essay's shift in emphasis back to Savio. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If you go to A, it says because it would indicate that the essay is now going back to focus on Savio's childhood. It does say well, the son of this, but then it only spends one sentence on that. It spends the rest of the time talking about, after his childhood, what he became interested in as a young, even as a young man. And so this is just way too specific on one part of that second split of the second part where you split it. If you go to C, sentence 5 wouldn't work. None of these would work just for those reasons that I explained earlier. But then it says 5 because it would indicate that the essay is now going to address Savio's experiences as a civil rights worker. No, it doesn't say it's only going to address his experiences as a civil rights worker. It talks about it. It says he did volunteer work, civil rights work, but it also said where he grew up, and it talked about how he went to classes that fall and then how he sort of reacted. So this is too specific on one part of it. And then 5, because it would signal the essay shift from Savio's childhood to his adult life. No, because if it did that, if this is his adult life and it's separating his childhood, well, why is childhood only mentioned in this one sentence? If it separated childhood from his adult life, all of this should be his childhood. So that doesn't make sense either. Okay. So the only answer choice is that would make sense is B. 52. Which choice would most clearly indicate that Savio succeeded in his appeal to protesters? So it says on December 2nd, 1964, Savio spoke insistently to a countless group of protesters. There is a time when blah, blah, blah. So he's giving this big speech. If you say insistently, that's that's just being very persistent in something, not giving up. That doesn't mean you succeeded. You could be very insistent and be very annoying, So insistent doesn't mean that he succeeded in his appeal. And it doesn't even mean people necessarily listened. What about emphatically? Emphatically means to be very, making an emphatic point, to stress a point, to really say, hey, listen to this. This thing is what's important. That doesn't mean it succeeded, okay? That just kind of describes the manner that he's talking to them in. And it's just saying, maybe it's also saying this part was really important. Well, that doesn't really address how well received it was by the audience. What about compellingly? Well, compellingly has an implication of it compels people to listen, compels people to, be persuaded. Compellingly means very persuasively, very convincingly, and that obviously you can't be persuasive unless someone is persuaded. H seems to certainly do that, succeeded in his appeal. And what about excitably? Well, you could be really excited and be really excitedly, weird, or just excited and no one really cares because you're like that weird excited person on the street screaming excitedly. So excitedly doesn't have any kind of implication about what people's response and whether people liked what you had to say or were like, wow, this is so great. So H is the only one that works. 53, it says on December 2nd, 1964, Savio spoke consistently to a countless group of protesters. We get what this is trying to say, meaning there's a lot of people, okay? But what does countless mean? It means there's so many, you can't really even count it. I mean, physically you could count it, but it's just so many, you could almost not count it, okay? The only way this could actually make sense is if you said countless groups of protesters. Well, there's only one group, so this doesn't actually grammatically makes sense in the way that the author or the writer probably intended, they probably meant countless protesters or something of that kind. And again, yeah, I mean that's really the main problem. So what are our options? What about numerous group? Well, numerous is a plural thing, and so is group plural or singular? Group is singular, right? Groups would be plural. So numerous group wouldn't work also. Okay, you could have numerous protesters, but not numerous group. You could have numerous groups though. And then high volume, insisting to a high volume group of protesters. High volume has more to do with either like how loudly they're talking, and there's no implication that the protesters are talking. And but aside from that, it has to do with like maybe a container and like density and like the capacity, how much of something is filled. And that's inappropriate to use when you're counting the number of people that there are in a crowd. And if you have large crowd, that's actually perfectly fine, because you can use the word large to describe the size of the crowd. Crowd of what? Crowd of protesters. So this perfectly works. 54. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would be least acceptable? Least acceptable. So which one is no? Which one oftentimes is the only one that's different? Well, 54, it says that day, Savio and 800 other protesters were taken to jail. And this is after he spoke. So Savio spoke to all these protesters. And that day, Savio and 800 other protesters were taken to jail in the largest mass arrest in California history. So probably he spoke first and then they were arrested. That's the order, right? Well, if you say not long after, does that work? Sure. It indicates, yeah, first this happened, then this. Check. What about soon? Yep. What about then? Yep. All these indicate how one thing happened after the other. They're I guess, make distinctions in time. One thing happened first, then the next. Besides is the only one that doesn't have that logical order. Besides is also just sort of, well, aside from this, or almost like in addition to sometimes. And that really is sort of out of place in a situation like this, where this is certainly talking about a chronological order of events, okay? All of them follow that except for G. So you know G is the odd man out. All right, on to question 55. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would be least acceptable? Another least question. And it says, days later, the California Board of Regents voted to override the university ban and granted full speech rights on the Berkeley campus. So they overrode this ban. So they said, okay, stop this ban. You guys get a free speech. Woo, yeah, okay, right. Ban and this action. All right, overriding the ban. Yeah, obviously allow them to have free speech. That makes sense. Well, but it's just, that seems to be acceptable, but we have to find out which is the least acceptable. So let's go through. Ban, comma, an action that. Sure, that granted, because this is the action was the overriding of the ban, and this ban did this, okay? This ban did that. It's basically, you have the sentence, basically the main part of the sentence ending at ban, and then after ban, you basically have a long modifying clause that describes how they overrode the ban and what that did, or what the overriding of the ban did. So that works. Without C, ban, and thus, they overrode the ban, and therefore, as a result, there was free speech everywhere on the campus. That works too. What about ban that? Well, this is different. First of all, it just looks different. I mean, you shouldn't take that as an example, as you know, oh well, it looks different. That's why it's right. That's why it's you have to circle that. But it says voted to override the university ban that. Well, if you have that, okay, that means all this stuff is a relative clause describing ban. Did the ban grant full speech rights? No, the ban was against full speech rights. So this doesn't logically make sense anymore. or I guess that one never did. But this makes it so that whole sentence doesn't logically make sense. These do, so the correct answer is D. That is the least acceptable. 56. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following true statement. Appointed by the governor, the California Board of Regents is assigned to oversee that state's university system. Should the writer add this sentence here? 56. So days later, so after the granted full speech rights on the Berkeley campus, does it make sense to have this here? This is about, it's about the California Board of Regents, but it says is assigned to oversee that state's university system. So this is basically taking a specific action that they did and then following it up with a sentence about what is the California Board of Regents? Like, its job is to do this, and it was appointed by the governor. Well, do you really need to know any of that stuff? Do you need to know it's appointed by the governor? No. And it's sort of implied that it oversees the state university system because it says it overrides the university. If it can override the university, you know it's more powerful than the university. And it doesn't really make sense to have the description of what it is come way at the end after describing the action it took to change something. So it doesn't really make sense to have that sentence there. But if we go through, it says yes, because it provides important background information concerning the vote. Certainly wasn't concerning the vote. What about because it explains the makeup of this particular board to the reader? Does it say what it's made up of, like who's on the board? No, it doesn't say who's on the board. It just says what it does. What about no, because it distracts the reader from the main point of the paragraph? Sure, that seems to work. Because the paragraph is about what? Overriding the ban and the protesters and all that stuff. This is just a description, like a Wikipedia, what is a California Board of Regents or something. What about J? No, because it does not provide enough specific enough information about the California Board of Regents. Is the problem here that we need more information? Do we need another do we need more Wikipedia information? No, we don't need that. So that's wrong. So the only answer choice that makes sense is H. 57, oh, a good short one. 57, the free speech movement changed campus life in the United States. It made a powerful case for the students' right to freedom of speech. Well, this one is actually a difficult one because here's the thing. You have basically two answer choices. You have four technically, but you have made for and makes for. Well, makes for wouldn't work because this all is past tense. This needs to be past tense, right? Because this is about what this did like 50 years ago. So made for, it would be made alone or made for. If you have it made a powerful case for the students' right to freedom of speech, that is certainly perfectly acceptable. If you have it made for a powerful case for the students' rights to freedom of speech, this is grammatically, technically correct. If you put it in Microsoft Word, it'll say it's okay. The problem is that you don't really need to say made for. Let's just, keep it simpler. It made. The other thing is you have this consistent sort of parallel structure throughout. Freedom of speech movement changed this. It made a powerful this. It did this. Okay? It became a model. It's like subject verb, clear active, type of structure. And this obviously is the only different structure if it said made for. The other problem is it's just sort of it's strange when you have it made for a powerful case for. It's just a lot of it did this for that, did that for that. It's not a technical grammar mistake. It's just that when you speak in English, in the English language, when you have a lot of this repetition, especially in a case like this, it just sounds very strange. And last, you could say is if you say it made for a powerful case. Made for is sort of an expression that it has this effect of doing this. Well, why can't you just say it just made a powerful case? Again, just keep it more concise, more straight to the point. The fewer words that you can say where you can eliminate unnecessary wording, the better. So I personally think this is like a tougher question just because this could be right and this isn't like overly wordier. It's just that It's very unusual to kind of have all these made for powerful case for this. It's just an unusual way of speaking. Okay. And but other than that, I think the best way of describing it is just the conciseness, especially if you're not a native speaker, and maybe if that's not clear, you know, because if you're a native speaker, you might be able to pick that up. But again, it's just the redundancy or the over wordiness that you can cut out. So no change. It made a powerful case. 58. It made a powerful case for the student's right to freedom of speech. It also popularized the sit-in. Well, is also fine here. Well, it is fine. That's fine, because what is it referring to? The free speech movement, and popularized the sit-in movement. Well, yeah, this is one thing it did to change campus life. It also changed campus life. That's one. But it also changed campus life by doing this. It also popularized. So also is a perfectly good word to put here to, you know, describe what's going on. And logically it makes sense, you know. It's not a contrasting word or anything like that. However, obviously is a contrast word. That wouldn't make sense because this is describing additional things or additional changes it brought to college campuses. And if you have it thus would not work, because that's like saying because it did this, it therefore popularized. Because it made the powerful case, it therefore popularized the sit-in as a protest tactic. That doesn't make sense. These are sort of separate things that this did. It's not one caused the other. So thus wouldn't work. What about for this reason? And again, for this reason, very similar to it thus. It creates a logical connection when there is no connection between this statement and that statement. This is just a list of benefits or a list of changes to campus life that the free speech movement brought. All right, on to question 59. It says, it also popularized the sit-in as a protest tactic, became a model for student rallies and protests across the country. Okay, well, this is just as is, there are a couple of problems here. You basically have a run-on sentence where you would need some kind of conjunction before and became. It also popularized the sit-in as a protest tactic and it also became a model. But if you don't have the conjunction here, it just says, you would basically just have subject, verb, object, and then verb, when in this case you would need to have that new and there, okay? Because it's a compound verb type of sentence where you have one subject with two verbs, okay? And so you would need to separate that, so it would say it popularized and became. Got it? The other thing is, as a protest tactic, you need to eliminate these commas, because as a protest tactic is essential here. It's not just description, but it's saying how did this sit-in become popular as a protest tactic, okay? A lot of people probably sat in on stuff, right? But to sit, and a lot of people just sit around. They have sit-ins at lunch. Let's sit down for lunch. But as a protest tactic, like let's sit here to protest this. That's in that way it became a popular tactic, and so this is essential to the meaning. So when you have a description that's essential to the meaning of the sentence, you don't have the commas, because it's not just interrupting the sentence, it's actually a real part of the sentence that you need to understand the sentence. So it says it also popularized the sit-in as a protest tactic and became. That's the only way it would make sense. And if you look at A, obviously A doesn't work. B works. P is exactly that. And you don't need a comma here, because it would say and became, right? No new comma here, because you don't have a new subject. You have the same subject as before. So no new comma. What about C? C has this problem of these unnecessary commas, and then you have it, meaning you have it also promoted the sit-in. Basically, because there's these commas, you could literally just have a period there. That's what it's essentially saying. You have a subject verb, it also popularized the sit-in, and then you have a new sentence, it became a model. Well, if you have it became a model, you need a period, or you need a comma and the word and or something, because there's a new subject and a new verb, right? Whereas here, the verb is describing the original subject still. So C is wrong, and then D is wrong because you need some kind of conjunction, the word "and" after the word "tactic" before the word "became." It's like saying I eat and drink every day. Well, I eat and drink, right? I don't say I eat drink every day. Just like you wouldn't say it also popularized, became a model. Or you would have to say it also popularized this and became that. Got it? Compound verbs, compound subjects, compound objects, you need conjunction separating them. So in this case, B is the only correct answer. And then C, it says, what did he do? It says, as for Mario Savio, he went on to earn a master's degree in physics. He then taught mathematics and physics in high school and for his life, blah, 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 blah. Okay. There's nothing wrong with this. He then taught this and physics. It's just saying, you don't need commas. He did this and he did this. Like, I ate apples and oranges or something. So, again, F is the correct answer because you don't need that unnecessary punctuation. Certainly, you don't need it between I taught this and this. You don't need it between compound objects, mathematics, and physics. It's like I don't need to say I like skiing and snowboarding. There's no comma needed in between skiing and snowboarding. And then, why would you have comma after taught? You wouldn't need a comma after then, only if you have a new subject. But in this case, that wouldn't make sense because before, this sentence starts with the word he, right? So he did this, and then if you said and then, comma, but in this case, it's just saying he then. So there's no need to have that comma. And there's no comma that you need to put between the verb and the object. Like I don't need to say I kicked the ball. I don't have to say I kicked, comma, the ball. You just say I kicked the ball, right? No comma. Same with that, no comma needed. And then again, you don't need this then here for the same reason I explained it earlier. So the only answer that makes sense is F, no change. So that's it for passage 4 of test 4. And whenever you're ready, just move on to passage 5.